While exploring the massive world of Azeroth, it becomes apparent that you really only get to experience a fraction of the land's history. Thousands of years have seen the rise and fall of empires, the moving of mountains, and so much more, with many of the details being lost in time. Few civilizations are more ingrained into the world than the trolls, hardy beings that have a long and complicated history of conquest and magic. Today, I want to dive into one tribe in particular, the Gurubashi jungle trolls of Stranglethorn Vale. Players end up exploring this zone quite a bit during their adventures, but there are entire layers of lore that are overlooked, and I want to bring them to light today. Using the established timeline, troll legends, and a bit of measured speculation, I want to document the fall of the Gurubashi in one cohesive video that helps make some of these mysteries easier to understand. Blue crystals, flooded cities, cursed relics, it's all here. So with all that being said, let's get right into it. 16,000 years ago, trolls were the dominant civilization on ancient Kalimdor, a pristine supercontinent with not a lot else going on to interfere with the rising empire. From the spiritual capital of Zandalar, the Empire of Zul formed, and trolls quickly spread across Azeroth. Over time, different areas of the empire acclimated to different environments, eventually growing more independent but still holding relatively good relations with one another. These segmented groups outside of Zandalar would become known as the Gurubashi, Amani, and Drakari empires, presiding over large regions of jungle, forest, and tundra respectively. There were also small colonies of what were known as dark trolls that became secluded in the twilight wilderness of the world, emerging only at night and exploring the mysterious Well of Eternity, a font of arcane magic at the heart of Kalimdor. These trolls were forgotten for centuries, and blessed by the powers of the Well, eventually evolved into the first Night Elves, creatures that were both intelligent and skilled in battle. Though the elves and trolls continued to develop independent of one another, the sheer power of the Night Elves could not be ignored. In the next few millennia, Night Elves would become a major power on Kalimdor. Periodic battles broke out between the two races when the elves started to push further into troll territory, but the arcane magic wielded by the elves was too powerful to overcome. The troll empire at this time was at its limit, the separate factions being pressed back into their own holdings. Shortly before 10,000 years ago, the infamous Queen Ajara signed a treaty with the Zandalari that prevented further bloodshed, which is implied to have extended to the other tribes as well. Not long after, the Great Sundering ripped across the world, the Night Elves' own hubris devastating the world and breaking up the trolls onto many separate continents. In the wake of this apocalypse, there are a few important things to note. Without the experience of sea travel, the Empire of Zul was finally broken, and while the Amani and Drakari were fortunate enough to remain mostly intact, the Gurubashi Empire was not so lucky. With their territory already almost bisected by the elves during their encroachment, the Sundering meant the total isolation of the eastern and western halves of this domain forever. In the east, the jungle trolls would regroup at their capital of Zul'Gurub within Stranglethorn Vale, while the remnants in the west would eventually morph into the sand trolls of Zul'Farrak, the jungles wasting away into the dune sea of Tanaris we know today. Another curious point to discuss are these ancient empires' connections to the Titans and the Old Gods. The Amani Empire may have had a settlement near Uldaman, and the Gurubashi may have known about the dark presence underneath Baal Madan or of the Titan ruins at the Rust Mal dig site, just below Zul'Farrak. Those scarabs within the city also look suspiciously similar to the Silithid controlled by the old god Cthulhu. Anyway, the Sundering is regarded as the end of the first Gurubashi Empire, with the power of the trolls greatly diminished from its height. I say first because there is indeed a part 2, where things start to get much more complex and much more mysterious. The centuries after the Sundering were hard times for the Gurubashi. With the majority of their territory gone, the trolls focused first on the remainder of Stranglethorn Vale, regrouping with the Bloodscalp and Skullsplitter tribes and forming what I call the Second Gurubashi Empire. With Zul'Gurub still as their capital, many things continued as before, though with less territory and fewer ambitions of conquest. I'll come back to some events that potentially happened in this time period, but to our knowledge, things were overall pretty stable for a few thousand years. But as with all empires, they eventually succumbed to turmoil. Like other troll societies, the Gurubashi continued to worship the Loa, spirits of the wild gods that often manifested as animals. A small sect of this population, though, was willing to take this worship in a dark direction in order to recreate the glory of the First Empire. These fanatics eventually communed with the Loa of Blood, the winged serpent Hakar, who promised power in exchange for sacrifices. Over generations, this bloodthirsty belief became more mainstream, the Empire devoting more and more resources to the Loa under the control of Hakari priests. The troll armies were even able to become seaworthy for a time, conquering islands in the South Seas and solidifying their hold in the Eastern Kingdoms. Meanwhile, the renewed Zandalari tribe, witnessing these invasions, disavowed the blood worship of their former kin, pledging to rid the world of Hakar's presence. 1500 years ago, the Zandalari invaded the shores of Stranglethorn Vale, allying with rebel groups of trolls to defeat Hakar in the Gurubashi Civil War, which saw the fanatics banished to the Swamp of Sorrows and the Empire dissolved once again. While the trolls would occasionally reunite during times of crisis, the Bloodscalps and Skullsplitters kept their distance from the Gurubashi in the following centuries, and we see those territories to this day in classic WoW, though the spirit of Hakar may not be gone forever. This time period, from 10,000 to 1500 WoW years ago, is a bit murky, but what's cool to think about is that this second iteration of the Empire may have lasted longer than the first, and was overall more stable too, if a little smaller in scope. With our overview of the two parts of Gurubashi history completed, I'd now like to dive into a couple specific legends of the trolls that are really awesome, but also a little problematic to place in our timeline. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank Runs with Bears for collaborating with me on this video. We may not have agreed on everything theory-wise, but I still really appreciate the ideas, and talking things through made it a lot easier to break down. This video was one of the more difficult ones I've made because of the abstract nature of some of these tales. There are contradictions in the lore and not a lot to go off of. When sorting through all of this, sometimes I had to choose between a timeline where 3 out of 5 clues made sense instead of 2. I'm here to present what I think makes the most sense, but I understand there are other interpretations as well, and I want to hear your thoughts too. The first legend I want to discuss is the Stone of the Tides, a powerful artifact that gives the user immense control over water and the tides. According to the tale, the stone washed up on the shore of Stranglethorn and was found by a troll warrior. Upon discovering its power, this warrior was granted a place in Zul'Gurub as tide bearer of the court. But this mastery over water came with a dire cost. With each coming and going of the tides, the tide bearer became less of himself, losing his corporeal form, pulsing in and out of existence, until in his dying days, he traveled to the beach where he had first found the stone and walked into the sea, disappearing for the last time. Generations later, the Stone of the Tides washed up upon the shores of Stranglethorn, and another tide bearer was chosen as the troll brought the stone to Zul'Gurub. So the process continued for generations, the stone appearing with the tide, and the tide bearer leaving into the tide. We don't know exactly when this cycle of tide bearers began, and it's also not clear as to why the stone showed up here, but Archmage Runeweaver has this to say about it. I have conjectured that it is actually a physical manifestation of the powers of the Water Lord, a powerful elemental of the seas. How and why such an object would leave the Water Lord's control and fall into the hands of the trolls is another question that is beyond the scope of my knowledge. In my opinion, it makes sense that this cycle of tide bearers began during the Second Empire, sometime between 10,000 and 1500 years ago. After the Sundering, with the seas in upheaval and the elementals going a little crazy, it seems logical this artifact would be misplaced during this era instead of during the more intact Old Kalimdor era. My best estimate would be closer to the 10,000 end of the time period, but it really could fall anywhere. It seems the process continues to exist even in the modern day. with Gazban, a goblin, coming across the stone most recently and harnessing the power of water. After investigating, you end up briefly handling the stone before delivering it to Baron Revelgaz in Booty Bay for his personal collection of items. It's not known if simply possessing the stone is enough to curse the owner, or if one must use it, but I'm a little concerned for the Baron. Perhaps Caitlyn's blade, another troll relic that is used to destroy the connected Altar of the Tides, is enough to break the curse entirely, and maybe the Baron ends up with just a pretty stone after all. The Stone of the Tides is interesting to me because it connects the Gurubashi tribe to Neptulon, the Lord of Water. You might have thought of this as just a standalone story when you claimed the stone off the coast of Stranglethorn, but introducing another troll legend starts connecting the dots in ways that most players have probably never considered. Our next tale tells of the lost city of Ilalai, which I've talked about on this channel briefly once before. Long ago, Neptulon sent the great Kraken of the Deeps to flood Ilalai, a Gurubashi city on the coast that was home to a troll named Minloth the Serpent, a witch doctor in the service of Gurubashi chief Var-Gazul. This tale is told on the aptly named Fall of Gurubashi tome during an alliance quest in the zone. And while I won't read the whole thing here, there are many parts of it I do want to address. Minloth, standing firm, called forth his magic. The waves sent to Ilalai parted and washed to both sides, and they flooded the jungle beyond. Minloth bellowed and his magic gathered the power of his minion's spells, and he cast it at the approaching Kraken. The seas parted, and Minloth's spell sped toward the servants of Neptulon. Lightning tore the sky and the spell struck them, and 1,000 bolts fell, boiling water and burning craters in the earth. But the Kraken are old, very old. They remembered when the land was first born from the sea. They remembered when magic was new, and so it failed. A rumble was heard as the great waves rose from the deep and raced toward the land. When they reached Ilalai, they cast a shadow on the city. But before they destroyed it, the Kraken halted, poised. Minloth grimaced and hurled his staff, his last bold act. The Kraken then bent their fury upon Minloth, and an ocean fell upon Ilalai, and it was no more. And finally, when the waters reached the mountains, they stopped. Appeased, they retreated back beyond the shores, and they left a wake of death. They retreated, but they surged around Ilalai and remained, drowning it forever. And the chief Var-Gazul, safe behind the mountains in Zul'Gurub, went out to the jungle and found it washed clean of his people. And he despaired, for his dreams of conquest were thwarted, and never was Minloth the Serpent found. There is a lot to break down here. There are many clues that point to the drowned city of Ilalai being none other than the ruins at the Vale Reef, just off the coast of western Stranglethorn. Several quest NPCs reference this as the Sunken Troll City, and it's one of the only submerged ruins in the entire zone. We also know that Var-Gazul gazed out from Zul'Gurub and was able to witness this destruction, meaning it had to happen somewhere nearby. It's also possible that the city was further west and is not seen in the game now, but for other reasons I'll mention soon, I think the parallels are too strong to ignore. Let's talk next about Minloth. Though he is known as Minloth the Serpent, this witch doctor demonstrates immense magical power, especially over water and the tides. Putting together the two troll legends, this indicates to me that Minloth may have actually been the tide bearer in Var-Gazul's court, harnessing the element of water to aid in his conquests of the South Seas. This would place Minloth during the time when Hakkar worship was prevalent, but shortly before the Civil War, which could explain his title of the Serpent that replaced the traditional name of Tidebearer. Perhaps even the staff that he hurled into the sea was equipped with the Stone of the Tides, helping him cast such mighty spells before his doom. Which brings us to perhaps the most important piece of the puzzle: why Neptulon was angered enough to flood an entire city of trolls. I have two theories. First, that the violent conquests of the Gurubashi also resulted in the slaughter of some of his followers. perhaps even other trolls on islands that turned to worshipping the sea, which in turn roused him to seek retribution. Second, that Neptulon realized the Stone of the Tides was being used by a mortal for nefarious reasons and wanted to reclaim it. While both of these could be true at the same time, I'm inclined to believe the first is more true because the stone still reappeared in Stranglethorn after the flood. However, Neptulon could have merely wanted to send a message that using the stone for conquest was not permissible, but the other tide bearers had been sanctioned by him. Regardless, the flood took out a major coastal hub of the Gurubashi, and I think this disaster could have jump-started the civil war, which saw the Zandalari invade and bring down the Hikari regime inside Zul'Gurub. With the Altar of the Tides, a slab magically connected to the stone itself, being found in the ruins in the Vale Reef, I also think this is the proof we need to establish this area as the remnants of Ilalai, the sunken city taken by Neptulon. There is another interesting connection between the trolls and water that I don't think anybody has talked about before. In the Burning Crusade, another quest was added to Stranglethorn Vale that has you discover the Bloodscalp tribe is using unusual magic granted to them by a water elemental named Nias. This could indicate the trolls here retain a fragment of their devotion to the sea they had during the times of the Empire, and their territory is also the closest to the sunken city on the coast, another clue that supports this theory. There is also a parallel to my idea earlier about the Gurubashi conquering tribes that worshipped the sea. Now we know that trolls are at least capable of doing this. Before we close out today's video, there are a few loose ends within the troll legends that I've found connections to, a few of which tie together into a nice little theory of their own. During the Alliance quest Curzon's Mystery, there are a total of 4 troll legends scattered among the ruins in the zone. We've already discussed the third legend, Fall of Gurubashi, but I think the other 3 can give us some insight as well. The second troll legend, the Tale of Grelek the Wanderer, tells of a one-armed troll warrior cursed by the Loa to wander forever, and while we don't know a lot else about him, we actually end up fighting his spirit in Zul'Gurub as one of the Edge of Madness bosses. His 2 best pieces of loot give attack power bonuses when fighting Dragonkin, a rare boost that could imply something about his past, but truly we'll never really know. The first troll legend is the main thing I want to focus on for the rest of this video. Titled Moon Over the Vale, this tablet is a poem, and a couple of the verses are very interesting. And when our brethren pass into realms beyond the known, the soul spirit hardens deep beneath the veil. And when our brethren pass into the mountain's temple, we shall protect their eternal spirit, encased within the holy blue crystal. These few lines were what I needed to assemble a window into the Empire's past. Something so pervasive to Stranglethorn Vale, but something that very few would link to the trolls. The term Holy Blue Crystal is the key, and some of you may already see parts of this theory. In Booty Bay, there is a quest that has you visit the basilisks in the north to collect crystals that permeate their bodies, known as Singing Blue Shards. Additionally, players recover intact, singing blue crystals from the Venture Co. digging in the foothills near the Crystal Vein Mine, another place filled with basilisks. According to the goblins, these beasts consume the crystals, unique to this zone, which in turn give them their hardened skin. But there is another layer of complexity going on here. It is well known that basilisks across Azeroth have piercing gazes and/or breath attacks that can stun enemies, or even turn them to stone if given long enough. It is my belief that in consuming the blue crystals, this has affected the magic of the basilisks here, giving them the ability to freeze creatures within the very same blue crystal material. There is definite proof of this happening, as in multiple areas of the zone where basilisks are present, one can encounter petrified trolls and even a few humans frozen in time. Stark blue statues that stand out against the jungle background. Over generations, it is likely these crystal formations would return to the earth, disappearing underground where they would later be excavated or consumed by cave-dwelling basilisks once more. In a sort of chicken or egg scenario, we don't know where the original blue crystal came from, but it is possible the basilisks simply evolved to produce the substance on their own and began the cycle that way. Let's return to the trolls and the poem that discusses a very similar blue crystal. I believe this references an ancient ritual or burial practice developed by the Gurubashi during the time of the First Empire within their capital of Zul'Gurub. The poem reads, "We shall protect their eternal spirit encased within the holy blue crystal," which I take to mean this petrification process may have been an important step in burying the dead, using trained basilisks to freeze the fallen. This could even tie back to the name of the crystals themselves, Singing Blue Shards, which may hint that some part of a being's soul or energy is captured inside the crystal and resonates therein. While this practice may have been in use during the old days of the Empire, it is no longer. We don't see any trained basilisks in Stranglethorn Vale anymore, but we do see them in the sister city of Zul'Farrak across the sea, providing a possible clue that some vestigial part of this ritual remains today, lost somewhere along the way of the Empire's fall. We also don't know much about this mountain's temple mentioned in the poem, or the similar emperor's tomb mentioned in the 4th troll legend, but my guess actually falls into a similar line of thinking. Around Zul'Gurub, there are ruins dotting the foothills that are inaccessible to players and are blocked by debris, perhaps the entrances to one or both of these structures. In the thousands of years of the Gurubashi existing and falling from their peak since the time of Old Kalimdor, these grand monuments have become relics of a past age, perhaps still containing catacombs filled with petrified stone ancestors, or even revered former rulers. So there you have it, a comprehensive look at the Gurubashi Empire and its many awesome sites that have slipped into legend. Maybe next time you venture into this zone, you'll view the Stone of the Tides, the Vile Reef, or even those strange blue crystals in a whole new way. Thank you all so much for watching. Happy 4th of July, and until next time, may the Force be with you.